My parents received $2,000 a month from me so they could live comfortably. But on my wedding day, they did not show up at all. When I called, my mother snapped, "Do not bother us." I hung up shaking and immediately closed every account in my name. 30 minutes later, they called me frantically. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family to protect your peace. My name is Simone. I am 33 years old, and today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the day I finally stopped paying for my own disrespect. The bridal suite at the St. Regis Hotel was suffocatingly quiet. 15 agonizing minutes. That was all the time left before the string quartet would begin playing the processional. My three bridesmaids, dressed in stunning emerald gowns, hovered around the vanity mirror, exchanging nervous glances that they thought I could not see. The scent of fresh white roses hung heavy in the air, masking the thick, undeniable, ugly tension entirely. I stood before the full-length mirror, smoothing the delicate lace of my custom gown, refusing to let my hands tremble. I looked perfect. Everything was perfect. Except for the glaring reality that the front row of the ceremony hall, the pew specifically reserved for the bride's family, sat completely empty. "Simone, babe," my maid of honor Keisha murmured, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "The wedding coordinator just checked the lobby again. They are not here. Do you want me to try calling Darius one more time?" "No," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "I will call my mother." I picked up my phone from the vanity. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate childish hope still clinging to the idea that they were just stuck in Atlanta traffic, that they would rush through the double doors breathless and apologetic, ready to walk me down the aisle to Julian. I pressed my mother's contact name. The phone rang twice before Evelyn picked up. "What is it, Simone?" my mother answered. Her voice was sharp, irritated, and completely devoid of any maternal warmth. There was no background noise of a rushing car, no breathless apologies, just elevator music playing. "Mom, where are you?" I asked, gripping the edge of the marble vanity. "The ceremony starts in exactly 12 minutes. The coordinator needs to seat you." A heavy sigh echoed through the speaker. "Simone, do not bother us right now. We are at the dealership in Buckhead. Brittany's Porsche started making a weird rattling noise this morning, and you know how anxious she gets. Darius is completely stressed out trying to handle the sales representative. We had to come immediately to negotiate a trade-in for the newer model." I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my blood draining fast. My older brother Darius, the undeniable golden child of our family, was currently at a luxury car dealership with his entitled white wife Brittany. They were shopping for a Porsche while I was standing in a wedding dress. "You are at a car dealership." I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "Mom, it is my wedding day. Julian and I are about to say our vows." "Oh, please stop being so dramatic." Evelyn scoffed, her tone dripping with condescension. "It is just a little paper signing. You and Julian already live together anyway. We will catch up later." "Darius needs my support right now. Brittany is crying in the lounge because they do not have the exact interior color she wants. Just go walk down the aisle, take your pictures, and stop being so selfish." "Selfish," I whispered, my voice cracking slightly. "Yes, selfish," she snapped. "Your brother is going through a crisis. The world does not revolve around your little party. I have to go. The finance manager is calling us into his office." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. The dial tone hummed softly in the quiet suite. Keisha and the bridesmaids stared silently. For 33 years, I had been the family's afterthought, the scapegoat who was only tolerated when I was writing a check. I had built a highly successful event management software company from the ground up, only to be treated like an inconvenience. Meanwhile, my parents worshipped Darius, funding his failed business ventures and catering to Brittany's microaggressions. Every month, I transferred $2,000 into my parents' account to ensure they could live comfortably. I paid their suburban mortgage. I added Darius and Evelyn as authorized users on my American Express Black Card for emergencies. A car upgrade was an emergency. My wedding was a nuisance. I looked at my best friends, their faces pale with shared outrage. Taking a deep, cleansing breath, I finally let go of the immense guilt that had chained me to their toxic expectations for my entire adult life. I did not cry. Instead, a wave of absolute freezing clarity washed over me. "We get married," I said, a slow, sharp smile touching my lips. I unlocked my phone and opened my banking application. With precise, deliberate taps, I navigated to the account settings. Swipe, confirm. Darius and Evelyn were permanently removed from the American card. I navigated to my scheduled transfers. Swipe, confirm. The $2,000 monthly allowance was permanently canceled. Finally, I logged into the secondary bank portal and selected the mortgage payment account. Freeze account. Confirm. I locked my phone and handed it to Keisha. The doors to the ceremony hall opened. I walked down the aisle alone, my head held high. I married Julian, the man who truly loved me. When we walked out of the hall as husband and wife, Keisha rushed over. My phone was vibrating relentlessly. 47 missed calls from Evelyn. The luxury dealership had just declined the card completely. The vibration felt like victory. Handing it to Keisha, I stepped into the Astor ballroom. The reception was a breathtaking vision of orchids and chandeliers, with Atlanta's elite applauding us. The jazz band played as Julian pulled me close. I rested against his chest. For 2 hours, I lived entirely in the present, toasting with my new in-laws, who embraced me with warmth my relatives never offered. We ate filet mignon, laughed at the speeches, and danced. It was flawless. But I knew the storm was coming. Julian and I had just picked up the silver knife when the heavy oak doors slammed open. The loud crash brought the entire room to a dead halt. There they were, my mother Evelyn glaring fiercely through designer glasses, my father Richard, his face purple with rage, Darius, the untouchable golden child, looking frantic. And trailing behind them, red-faced and clutching her fake purse, was my entitled white sister-in-law Brittany. They had not bothered to change into wedding attire. They looked exactly like arrogant interlopers crashing a party they felt entitled to ruin. A collective gasp rippled through the sea of tuxedos and gowns. Julian tensed beside me, but I placed a restraining hand on his arm. I had been preparing for this confrontation my entire life. Evelyn marched straight down the aisle, her heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood. She marched directly to our sweetheart table and pointed a trembling finger at my face. "Simone, unfreeze that bank card right this instant!" Evelyn shrieked, her voice carrying to the farthest corners of the silent ballroom. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to sit in the finance office of a luxury dealership and be told the card was declined? The sales representative looked at us like common street trash. I took a slow sip from my champagne flute. "Hello, Mother," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "You missed a truly beautiful wedding ceremony. The vows were exceptionally lovely." "I do not care about your stupid vows," Evelyn snapped, slamming her hand down on our table. "I care that you threw a petty tantrum and deliberately cut off your own brother. Darius is the rightful heir to this family. He urgently needs a top-tier vehicle to meet with clients. Brittany's car was unsafe to drive. We needed $15,000 for the down payment, and you chose today to lock the account. Open your banking application and authorize the transaction immediately." Before I could answer, Brittany pushed past Darius, her face twisted into a condescending sneer. "This is exactly why people do not take you seriously, Simone," Brittany scoffed, crossing her arms. "You are being completely ghetto and petty over a minor delay. We are your family and we had a vehicular emergency. But you always make absolutely everything about yourself, do you not? You are punishing Darius because you are jealous. Now pull out your phone and fix this mess before you ruin our weekend." The sheer audacity of her microaggression hung in the tense air. She stood in my expensive wedding venue wearing a cheap track jacket, calling me ghetto, while demanding I buy her a car. I set my champagne flute down with a definitive clink. "Brittany," I said, slowly projecting my voice so every doctor and corporate executive in the room could hear me. "The only thing ghetto in this room is showing up to a formal black tie wedding in athleisure wear to beg for a monthly allowance." Brittany gasped loudly, taking a stumbling step backward as if I had physically struck her. "As for the credit card," I continued smoothly, turning my unwavering gaze back to my shocked mother. I did not just freeze it, Evelyn. I officially reported the $15,000 charge to American Express as fraudulent activity. Darius choked audibly on his breath, his eyes bulging in absolute panic. You did what? He demanded, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. I reported it as active fraud. I repeated, enunciating every single syllable. Because it is fraud, Darius. I never authorized a luxury car upgrade for a sister-in-law who cannot even afford her own nail appointments. For 10 long years, I sent this family $2,000 a month because you falsely claimed you needed help with basic groceries and utilities. I gave you that authorized user card strictly for genuine medical emergencies. I did not work 80-hour weeks building a profitable software empire from scratch so I could fund the fake lifestyle of a 35-year-old man who still asks his mother to cut his steak. The resulting silence in the St. Regis ballroom was deafening. I could see my new in-laws exchanging disgusted looks, directing their intense disdain entirely at my so-called family. Evelyn's jaw trembled violently, stripped of her usual arrogant armor. She looked around frantically, suddenly acutely aware of the hundreds of judging eyes permanently fixed upon her ruined social standing. My father, Richard, who had been simmering in aggressive silence the entire time, finally erupted like a volcano. He lunged forward suddenly, slamming both of his heavy fists onto our sweetheart table with enough raw force to topple a tall crystal vase of white orchids. You disrespectful, insolent little brat! Richard roared loudly, his face a terrifying mask of pure fury. You do not ever talk to your mother or your older brother that way in public. You think because you have a little bit of money now, you can humiliate your own blood in front of strangers. I am the respected head of the Brooks family. I will break you for this disrespect. As of this exact second, you are banished from the family mansion in Buckhead. Do not ever try to step foot on my personal property again. I did not flinch at his loud volume. I did not back away from his posture. I looked directly at the furious, red-faced man who had maliciously belittled me my entire life. A slow, chilling smirk spread across my face as I tilted my head slightly. You mean my mansion? The color drained from my father's face. He opened his mouth, finding no words. My mother stared at me as if I had grown a second head. I did not let them recover. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. My assistant Elena stepped forward. She dropped a heavy leather portfolio of legal documents directly onto our sweetheart table. What is this nonsense? Evelyn demanded, eyeing the folder suspiciously. Are you threatening us with fake paperwork, Simone? We have lived in that Buckhead estate for 20 years. You cannot just wave a folder and pretend you hold power over your elders. You lived in it, yes, I corrected smoothly. But you do not own it anymore, Mother. 3 years ago, you and Richard made a foolish financial decision. You secretly took out a massive second mortgage on the estate. You did it to fund Darius's doomed cryptocurrency startup. Darius flinched violently. Brittany's smug expression cracked, replaced by sheer panic. Her hands shook as she looked between her husband and the legal documents. That is a lie, Richard bellowed, clenching his fists. Our finances are none of your business. You know nothing about complex investments. You are making up stories to embarrass us. I know a foreclosure notice. I fired back, my voice echoing clearly. When Darius lost every penny of that loan you defaulted, the bank was days away from putting the mansion on the public auction block. You were going to be thrown out onto the street, but a private investment firm swooped in, bought your toxic debt, and paid off the outstanding balance. Evelyn swallowed hard, the blood draining from her face. S&J Holdings, she whispered, her voice trembling. The private firm that bought the deed. They allowed us to stay as long as we maintained the property. Exactly, I said, offering her a merciless smile. S&J Holdings, Simone and Julian Holdings. I am the sole managing director of that blind trust, Mother. I bought your debt. I hold the absolute legal deed to that property. For the past 3 years, you have not been the esteemed owners of a Buckhead mansion. You have been my non-paying tenants. I allowed you to live there out of the goodness of my heart. But since you decided to skip my wedding to buy a luxury vehicle with my stolen money, that generous arrangement is officially terminated. Brittany let out a strangled, horrified gasp. She spun around to face Darius, her face ashen and completely devoid of its previous arrogant flush. The entitled white woman who had just confidently called me ghetto was now staring at her husband like he was a complete stranger who had scammed her. "Darius, what is she talking about?" Brittany shrieked, grabbing his arm and shaking him aggressively. "You told my parents that you were a self-made millionaire. You told my father that the Buckhead estate was your guaranteed inheritance. You swore to us that we had generational wealth backing us up. Are you telling me that your little sister actually owns the house we sleep in?" Darius tried to shush her, his hands waving frantically in the air to calm her down. "Brittany, baby, please lower your voice. She is just twisting the facts to make me look bad. It is extremely complicated business stuff. Okay, I promise you I can explain absolutely everything to you later in private when we are alone." "Explain what exactly?" Brittany screamed hysterically, completely abandoning her polished country club persona in front of the entire ballroom. "That you are completely broke. That you have been living off your sister's charity while pretending to be some elite tech investor. My father paid for our entire wedding because you promised him you had a massive trust fund coming. You are a pathetic lying fraud. Darius." The wedding guests were practically vibrating with shock. Several of Julian's colleagues were openly recording the dramatic meltdown on their mobile phones. I watched Brittany unravel with absolute satisfaction. She had built her entire identity on marrying into a wealthy, influential black family, using our supposed high status to elevate herself socially, while simultaneously throwing racist microaggressions in my direction whenever she felt insecure. Now, her entire social foundation was collapsing in a spectacular, entirely public fashion, and she could not handle the blistering truth. Evelyn tried to intervene aggressively, grabbing Brittany's hands. "Brittany, sweetheart, please do not listen to Simone. She is a vindictive, jealous girl trying to tear our beautiful family apart. Darius is brilliant. He is going to be incredibly wealthy very soon. We just need to quietly handle this little misunderstanding." "Get your hands off me, Evelyn!" Brittany shrieked, yanking her arms away from my mother with a look of pure disgust. "You are all frauds. You are nothing but broke, pathetic frauds living a giant lie. I am calling my father right now." Darius's face turned dangerous crimson. The utter humiliation of being exposed in front of his wife, his parents, and hundreds of prominent Atlanta figures finally pushed him over the psychological edge. The golden child who had never faced a single real consequence in his entire 35 years of life completely lost his mind. With a guttural roar, Darius shoved Brittany aside and lunged forward across the polished dance floor. He charged toward our sweetheart table, teeth bared like a cornered animal. Julian immediately stepped in front of me, his broad shoulders shielding me from the impact, while two of the venue's security guards materialized from the shadows, grabbing Darius by the arms and hauling him backward. "You think you have won, you smug little witch!" Darius screamed, fighting wildly against the security guards holding him back. Spit flew from his mouth as he thrashed. "You think you can just cut me off and take my house? You are trapped, Simone. You cannot do anything to me. I own 50% of your software company." The security guards tightened their grip on his arms, but Darius continued to thrash wildly against their hold. His designer suit jacket ripped at the shoulder seam, a loud tearing sound that echoed over the soft jazz music still playing in the background. Desperate and hyperventilating, he managed to wrench one arm free just long enough to reach into his breast pocket. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper that had been sitting at the bottom of a drawer for half a decade. He waved it in the air like a winning lottery ticket, his eyes wide with triumph. "You cannot touch me," Darius yelled, spit flying from his lips as he struggled against the guards. "I have the original profit-sharing agreement right here. You signed this when you were coding your little startup in our garage 5 years ago. I provided the workspace. I paid the electricity bills. This piece of paper legally guarantees me 50% of your entire software company. Simone, you are going to pay me millions." I stared at the pathetic yellowed sheet of paper he was waving frantically in the air. I recognized it immediately. It was a coffee-stained page from a spiral notebook he had shoved in my face when I was 28 years old, demanding a cut of my future earnings, just because I had plugged my laptop into his garage outlet. I had signed it just to get him to leave me alone so I could finish my programming sprint. Brittany, seeing a sudden glimmer of hope for her luxurious lifestyle, stopped crying and looked eagerly at the crumpled document. "See," she announced to the room, desperately trying to regain her shattered dignity. "Darius is a partial owner of her company. She owes us half of everything she has built." I did not even bother to respond to her delusional outburst. Instead, I simply turned my head and nodded toward a table near the front of the ballroom. A tall, distinguished African-American man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo stood up and buttoned his jacket. He walked over to our sweetheart table, adjusting his gold cufflinks. This was Lawrence, my lead corporate attorney, and he had been enjoying his roasted asparagus before the interruption. He looked at Darius with the kind of clinical, exhausted pity a professional reserves for an absolute amateur. "Sir, I strongly advise you to lower your voice and put that garbage away," Lawrence said, his deep voice cutting through the tension. "What you are holding is a legally worthless piece of scrap paper." Darius stopped thrashing, his chest heaving as he glared at the attorney. "You do not know what you are talking about. This has her actual signature on it. It is a binding contract." Lawrence offered a brief, humorless laugh. "I know exactly what I'm talking about, considering I am the one who structured her current enterprise. Let us review some basic United States corporate law, shall we?" That notebook page is entirely unnotarized and lacks any defining terms of consideration. Furthermore, the limited liability company you forced her to associate with that document was officially dissolved over 4 years ago. It no longer exists in any legal capacity. Lawrence stepped closer, staring Darius down. Simone's current multi-million-dollar software empire is a separate Delaware C corporation. It was officially formed and registered 2 full years after she moved out of your parents' garage. You contributed absolutely zero capital to this current corporation. You hold zero shares and sit on no board of directors. If you attempt to take my client to civil court using a coffee-stained napkin from half a decade ago, the judge will throw out your frivolous lawsuit immediately, and I will personally countersue you for every penny of our legal fees. You have absolutely nothing. The crumpled paper slipped from Darius's trembling fingers, fluttering uselessly to the hardwood floor. The final illusion of his power and wealth evaporated into the cold air. He sagged against the security guards, completely defeated, his mouth opening and closing without making a sound. Evelyn, realizing that her golden child had been utterly dismantled by basic corporate law, decided it was time to pivot her strategy. She dramatically pressed the back of her hand against her forehead, her eyes filling with instantaneous manufactured tears. "How can you be so cruel to us on your wedding day?" she cried out, attempting to weaponize the sympathy of the audience. Evelyn took a step toward me, her voice shaking with fake sorrow. "We are your family, Simone. We love you so much. Yes, we made a mistake by being slightly delayed at the dealership today, but we rushed here as fast as we could to celebrate your marriage. You are humiliating us in front of all these wonderful people over a simple misunderstanding. We are your flesh and blood, and you are treating us like we committed a terrible crime just because we missed the ceremony." She looked around the ballroom, clearly hoping the wealthy guests would take pity on a weeping mother. Julian, who had remained a silent protective wall beside me, finally stepped forward. He reached for the microphone resting on our table. "A simple misunderstanding," Julian asked, his voice echoing loudly through the ballroom speakers. "You claim you were just delayed rushing here to celebrate my wife." He turned toward the elevated DJ booth at the back of the room and gave a sharp, definitive nod. "Let us show everyone exactly how much you love your daughter." The massive projection screens behind the stage slowly descended from the ceiling. The room lights dimmed and crystal-clear security footage began to play for the entire crowd. It was a direct feed from the dealership's VIP lounge. The glowing red timestamp in the corner perfectly matched the exact moment I was walking down the aisle alone. It showed Evelyn, Richard, Darius, and Brittany happily popping a large bottle of incredibly expensive champagne and laughing uproariously about my unfortunate absence. The high-definition video played in a loop above the dance floor, projecting my family's treachery for every single guest to witness. You could hear the clinking of crystal glasses through the speakers, followed by my mother's distinct mocking laughter. She held up her champagne flute on the screen, declaring I could walk myself down the aisle alone. The reaction in the ballroom was immediate and merciless. A synchronized wave of appalled gasps erupted from the crowded tables. Surgeons, tech CEOs, and esteemed members of Atlanta's elite megachurches stared at the screen in absolute disgust. Evelyn stumbled backward, her manicured hands flying to her mouth in sheer horror. The meticulously crafted facade she spent decades building within Buckhead crumbled to dust in seconds. The wealthy socialites she frequently played bridge with were now actively turning their backs to her. Whispers of condemnation spread like wildfire across the room. People openly criticized the woman who prioritized buying a sports car over attending her daughter's wedding. Evelyn's social standing, the only currency she truly valued in this world, evaporated into thin air before my very eyes. Richard stared at the massive projection screen, the aggressive bluster completely draining from his rigid posture. He looked like a deflated balloon, his authority stripped away by the undeniable digital evidence of his own parental failure. He could not bully his way out of a high-definition video recording. He could not intimidate a room full of people who possessed 10 times his net worth. I stepped out from behind the sweetheart table, the heavy silk train of my wedding gown gliding across the polished floor. Julian walked closely beside me, radiating quiet, unshakable support. I stopped just a few feet away from my stunned parents. I reached into the hidden pocket of Julian's tuxedo jacket and pulled out a crisp, folded legal document. I held it out toward my father. Richard did not move to take it. He just stared at the stark white paper, as if it were a venomous snake. I let the document drop from my fingers. It fluttered down, landing perfectly on the edge of the nearest guest table, the bright red court stamp fully visible under the chandelier light. "What is that?" Richard demanded, his voice dropping to a hoarse, fearful whisper. "That is a legally binding court-stamped 30-day notice to vacate," I stated clearly, ensuring the surrounding tables could hear the finality in my tone. "I filed it with the Fulton County Courthouse on Friday afternoon. You have officially been served. You and Evelyn have exactly 1 month to pack up your belongings and vacate my property. If you are not entirely off the premises by the 30th day, the county sheriff will arrive to physically remove you and throw your possessions onto the curb." Darius let out a pathetic whimper, leaning heavily against a cocktail table for support. His delusions of grandeur had been replaced by the terrifying reality of impending homelessness. Evelyn finally broke. The cold, calculating matriarch dissolved into a puddle of desperate theatrical panic. She rushed forward, grabbing the lace fabric of my wedding dress with trembling hands. She fell to her knees, looking up at me with tear-streaked cheeks, completely abandoning her pride in a frantic bid for survival. "Simone, please!" Evelyn sobbed loudly, her voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "You cannot do this to us. We are your parents. We gave you life. You cannot throw us out into the street like common criminals. Blood is thicker than water, Simone. The Bible says, a daughter must respect her elders and honor her mother and father. You owe us your respect." I looked down at the woman who had spent 33 years making me feel completely invisible. I felt no pity. I felt no guilt. I gently but firmly pried her desperate fingers off my expensive gown, stepping back to create a solid boundary between us. "You only care about blood when you need a transfusion of my money," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "You only demand respect when you are actively disrespecting me. You chose to pop champagne at a car dealership instead of watching your only daughter get married. You made your choice, Evelyn. Blood is thick, but my boundaries are bulletproof." Evelyn wailed, burying her face in her hands. Richard knelt beside her, attempting to pull her up, but he looked just as broken and defeated. The powerful, commanding parents who had terrorized my childhood were nothing but a pathetic display of consequence catching up to bad behavior. Then the sound of aggressive footsteps broke the heavy silence. Brittany pushed her way to the front of their huddled group. Even in the face of total ruin, her entitled white privilege flared up desperately, trying to salvage some shred of material victory from the wreckage of her husband's exposed lies. Her face was red and streaked with mascara, but her eyes held a defiant, greedy glare. "Fine," Brittany spat out, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "If you are going to be a completely heartless monster and kick your own family out onto the street, Then we are leaving right now. We do not want to be at this tacky wedding anyway. But since Darius and I are losing our home, we are at least taking the brand new Porsche we drove here in. We need reliable transportation to find a new place to live, and you certainly owe us that much for ruining our weekend. I stared at my sister-in-law, genuinely amazed by her unwavering audacity. She still believed she was entitled to luxury vehicles funded by my bank accounts. She still thought she possessed the upper hand. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. I shook my head slowly, looking her directly in the eyes. I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers sharply at the venue's attentive head valet, who was standing quietly in the corner observing this entire chaotic, dramatic scene. The head valet, a sharp young man in a crisp uniform who had parked their luxury vehicle just 20 minutes prior, immediately stepped forward. He reached into his pocket and produced the sleek silver key fob attached to the brand new Porsche Panamera. Instead of handing it back to my brother or his furious wife, the valet placed the heavy keys directly into my outstretched palm. I closed my fingers around the cold metal, letting the undeniable reality of the situation sink into their greedy minds. Brittany let out a piercing, indignant shriek. She lunged forward, her hands clawing at the empty air between us. "What do you think you are doing?" Brittany screamed, her face contorting with absolute rage. "You cannot just order a valet to steal my personal property. That is my wedding anniversary gift. My husband bought that luxury car for me this morning. I am calling the Atlanta Police Department right now and having you arrested for grand theft auto." I did not flinch. I simply tossed the keys into the waiting hands of my lead security director, a towering man named Marcus, who stood silently behind Julian. "Marcus, please have the vehicle moved to the secure impound lot at my corporate headquarters," I instructed smoothly. "Make sure the GPS tracking is activated and disable the remote start access." "You are insane," Brittany yelled, pulling her cell phone out of her cheap track jacket. "Darius, do something. Tell this crazy woman to give me my keys back." Darius did not say a word. He stood completely frozen, his eyes glued to the floor, sweat beading on his forehead. "He cannot tell me what to do with my own corporate assets," I explained patiently, addressing Brittany as if she were a slow toddler. "Darius did not buy you a car this morning, Brittany. Darius cannot even qualify for a standard retail credit card. His credit score has been in the low 500s ever since he bankrupted his third fake startup company. He went to that luxury dealership today and picked out a vehicle, yes, but he leased it under my corporate account. The dealership ran the financial background check through S&J Holdings. I am the sole guarantor of that lease. Therefore, the car legally belongs to my company, not to you, and certainly not to the unemployed man standing next to you." Brittany slowly lowered her phone. She turned to look at Darius, her chest heaving as she processed the devastating magnitude of his lies. The illusion of the wealthy, successful black entrepreneur she had bragged about to all her white friends back in Charleston was entirely fabricated. "Is this true?" Brittany whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and sheer humiliation. "Darius, look at me. Look me in the eyes and tell me she is lying. Tell me you bought that car with your own money." Darius could not meet her gaze. He rubbed the back of his neck, his voice cracking as he mumbled his pathetic excuses. "Baby, you have to understand the market right now. My liquidity is tied up in overseas investments. I just needed to use the corporate account temporarily for the tax benefits. I was going to pay her back as soon as my next venture capital round closed." "You have no venture capital," I shot back, cutting through his delusion instantly. "You have no investments. You have been living off the $2,000 a month I sent to Mother while claiming you were a day trader. You are a 35-year-old dependent who just lost his free housing and his free car in the span of 10 minutes." Brittany let out a sound that was half sob, half furious growl. She backed away from Darius as if he were carrying a highly contagious disease. "I defended you to my entire family," she cried out, tears of absolute humiliation streaming down her cheeks. "My father warned me that you were nothing but a fast-talking scam artist. You told me we were building a high-society life here in Atlanta. You promised me a spot on the country club board. You are nothing. You do not even own the bed we sleep in. I refuse to be associated with this level of poverty." "Brittany, please do not do this right now," Darius begged, reaching out to grab her hand. "We can fix this. I know some people. I can make some calls." "Do not touch me!" Brittany shrieked, swatting his hand away violently. She reached down to her left hand and aggressively yanked the massive 3-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger. With a forceful throw, she hurled the heavy ring directly at Darius's chest. The diamond bounced off his torn suit jacket and clattered onto the polished hardwood floor, rolling away under a guest table. "That ring is probably fake too, just like everything else about you. I am going back to South Carolina tonight. Have fun living on the street, you broke, pathetic loser." Without another single word, Brittany turned on her designer heel and stormed out of the luxurious St. Regis ballroom. She pulled out her phone to summon an Uber, leaving her humiliated husband stranded in front of hundreds of silent, harshly judging witnesses. Darius dropped to his knees, frantically crawling under the expensive white tablecloths to desperately search for the discarded diamond ring. Evelyn watched her golden child groveling on the floor like a desperate beggar, her grand matriarchal dynasty completely and permanently destroyed. She had lost her elite social standing, her massive mansion, her luxury car, and now her prized daughter-in-law. The realization that she had absolutely no leverage left finally short-circuited her manipulative brain. Desperate to regain control of the rapidly slipping narrative, Evelyn suddenly gasped loudly. She clutched her chest with both hands, her eyes rolling back into her head as she collapsed dramatically onto the ballroom floor, screaming in agony that I was giving her a fatal heart attack. The heavy thud of my mother hitting the polished hardwood floor echoed through the St. Regis ballroom. Evelyn writhed dramatically on the ground, her hands clutching the bodice of her expensive evening gown. She gasped for air with loud theatrical wheezes, squeezing her eyes shut, as if she were enduring unimaginable physical agony. Richard immediately dropped to his knees beside her, shouting for a doctor and demanding that the wedding guests show some respect for his dying wife. Darius, still kneeling on the floor, searching for his discarded wedding ring, scrambled over to his mother's side. The wealthy attendees, many of whom were actual medical professionals, took a collective step backward. Nobody rushed forward to administer CPR. Nobody screamed in genuine terror. They all simply watched the spectacle with clinical detachment. My new husband, Julian, a highly respected chief of surgery, stood beside me and crossed his arms over his chest. He tilted his head, observing Evelyn's flushed face and rapid breathing. He did not even bother to unbutton his tuxedo jacket. We both recognized this manipulative performance for exactly what it was. It was Evelyn's ultimate desperate maneuver to regain control of a narrative that had completely slipped through her greedy fingers. If she could not maintain her social dominance, she would aggressively weaponize her own victimhood. I did not rush to her side. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly reached into my bridal gown's hidden pocket and retrieved my mobile phone. With steady fingers, I dialed 911 and placed the device on speakerphone so the entire silent room could hear the exchange. An emergency dispatcher answered immediately, asking for my location. I clearly articulated that we were in the Astor Ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel in Buckhead. I stated that an elderly woman had just collapsed, was clutching her chest, and required an immediate full paramedic response. Richard looked up at me, his eyes widening in sudden panic. He had expected me to dissolve into a puddle of guilt, to beg for her forgiveness, and to instantly unfreeze their bank accounts to cure her invisible ailment. He did not expect me to call his bluff by summoning a fleet of emergency medical technicians. "Simone, put the phone away," Richard hissed angrily, trying to pull Evelyn up by her shoulders. "She does not need an ambulance. She just needs her daughter to show some basic human compassion. Give her a glass of water and tell her you are sorry for causing this severe emotional distress." "I am not a medical professional, Richard," I replied coldly, looking down at the pathetic scene. "Julian is a surgeon, but he is currently off the clock. If Evelyn is truly experiencing a cardiac event caused by my boundaries, she needs immediate transport to a specialized emergency room." Evelyn's dramatic gasping suddenly hitched. She peeked through one half-open eye, realizing her performance was escalating into a legally documented medical incident. Within 8 minutes, the heavy ballroom doors swung open again. 4 paramedics rushed into the venue, rolling a sturdy medical stretcher and carrying heavy trauma bags. The crowd parted seamlessly to let them through. The lead paramedic knelt beside Evelyn, quickly asking her a rapid succession of medical questions, while his partner strapped a blood pressure cuff to her arm and attached a pulse oximeter to her finger. Evelyn tried to maintain her fragile victim persona, whispering weakly that her heart was breaking from family betrayal. The paramedic ignored her emotional commentary, staring intently at the digital monitor. He frowned, tapped the screen, and checked her pulse manually. He exchanged a very brief, knowing look with his partner. The medical assessment was completely undeniable. "Ma'am, your heart rate is slightly elevated from stress, but your blood pressure is absolutely perfect," the lead paramedic announced loudly, his voice carrying a distinct tone of professional irritation. "Your oxygen saturation is at 100%. You are not having a heart attack. You are not experiencing cardiac arrest. You are simply hyperventilating. I need you to sit up slowly and take deep, regular breaths." A wave of low, mocking laughter rippled through the elite crowd of guests. Evelyn's face turned a shade of brilliant, humiliated crimson. She realized the paramedics had just publicly confirmed what everyone in the room already suspected. She was faking a major medical emergency to manipulate her daughter. Richard scrambled to his feet, his face sweating profusely as he tried to salvage the remaining shreds of his dignity. "Well, she still needs to be transported to the hospital for a comprehensive evaluation," Richard insisted, aggressively pointing a finger at the paramedics. "She has a delicate constitution. We demand that you take her in the ambulance right now to ensure she does not suffer any secondary complications from this horrible evening." "That is your choice, sir," the paramedic replied, pulling out his digital tablet. "But you should know that an emergency transport without a qualifying medical necessity will not be fully covered by standard health insurance. We need the patient's primary insurance information before we load her onto the stretcher." Evelyn confidently motioned for Darius to fetch her purse. "I have premium top-tier corporate health insurance," she sneered, glaring at me from the floor. "Simone's company provides us with full platinum coverage. Hand them the card, Richard." I let out a genuine laugh that echoed through the ballroom. "I provided you with platinum coverage," I corrected her cheerfully. "But you are no longer a dependent of my corporation. 30 minutes ago, when you rudely dismissed my wedding over a luxury vehicle purchase, I officially terminated your enrollment in my company's health insurance plan. Your coverage was completely deactivated. If you get into that ambulance right now, you will be hit with a massive out-of-pocket medical bill." As my private security team forcefully escorted them out of the beautiful hotel, Richard turned around. He screamed that they would destroy my reputation in our megachurch. I watched the doors of the Astor Ballroom swing shut, sealing my toxic family out of my life. Julian wrapped a warm arm around my waist, pulling me back to the dance floor. We spent the evening celebrating with people who actually valued us, undisturbed by the temper tantrums happening in the hotel lobby. The next morning, we boarded a flight out of Atlanta. Settling into the luxurious first-class cabin for our trip to the Maldives, I finally exhaled a breath I had been holding for 33 years. Julian clinked his mimosa glass against mine. For 14 hours, we were completely disconnected from the chaos of the city soaring high above the clouds. It was a peaceful escape until we landed in Dubai for our connecting flight, and my phone connected to the airport's network. A relentless barrage of notifications flooded my screen. My phone vibrated so aggressively it nearly slipped from my fingers. I expected angry text messages from my brother or desperate pleas from my mother. Instead, my email inbox overflowed with alerts from a major crowdfunding website. My closest friends and loyal corporate employees had sent dozens of frantic screenshots. Julian leaned over, his relaxed expression vanishing. "Simone, what is that?" Julian asked, his voice tightening with concern. I opened the primary link sent by my assistant, Elena. My jaw tightened as the web page loaded. Evelyn and Richard had not wasted a single second. Driven by their desperate need to maintain an opulent lifestyle and furious over their humiliation, they had launched a highly deceptive GoFundMe campaign. The title of the fundraiser was aggressively manipulative: It read, "Help loving parents survive cruel abandonment and terminal illness." My stomach churned as I scrolled down. They had stolen professional watermarked photographs from my wedding photographer's online portfolio. They cropped Julian and me out of the images using pictures of themselves standing in formal wear to falsely portray an image of respectable, heartbroken elders. The written description below the stolen photographs was a masterful work of absolute fiction. Evelyn claimed she had been suddenly diagnosed with a severe terminal cardiac condition. She wrote that the terrifying medical episode she suffered at the St. Regis was a genuine heart attack, completely omitting the fact that professional paramedics had publicly declared her perfectly healthy. Richard added a lengthy, tearful paragraph claiming their successful, wealthy daughter had maliciously evicted them from their family home without warning. They explicitly stated they were facing imminent homelessness because I drained their retirement accounts to fund my lavish wedding. It was a complete inversion of reality. They were soliciting $50,000 in emergency donations, explicitly targeting the wealthy congregation of their prestigious Atlanta megachurch. "This is absolutely unbelievable," Julian whispered, reading the climbing donation tally over my shoulder. "They have already collected nearly $8,000 from members of their congregation. People are leaving incredibly supportive comments praying for your mother's miraculous recovery and condemning you for being an evil, ungrateful child. They think they can use the church as a shield," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "They think they can weaponize their religious community to extort money and destroy my professional reputation while I am stuck on a tropical island. They severely underestimate my reach." I did not panic. I did not shed a single tear of frustration. I simply utilized the private high-speed internet connection in the premium airport lounge. I located the direct corporate contact number for the GoFundMe fraud investigation department. Because my software company frequently collaborated with major financial institutions to verify secure transactions, I possessed high-level administrative credentials. I dialed the number bypassing the standard customer service queue and immediately connected with a senior fraud investigator. "Good morning," I stated clearly, my professional demeanor taking total control of the situation. "My name is Simone Brooks, Managing Director of S&J Holdings. I am calling to report a massive active financial scam currently operating on your platform. The campaign organizers Evelyn and Richard Brooks are utilizing stolen copyrighted photography to solicit funds under completely fraudulent pretenses. Furthermore, they are falsely claiming a terminal medical diagnosis to defraud donors. I have legally certified paramedic reports proving the medical claims are entirely fabricated, and I have court-stamped documents proving the property they claim to be evicted from legally belongs to my corporate trust." The investigator typed rapidly on his keyboard. "Ma'am, these are incredibly serious allegations. If you can provide the certified documentation to our secure portal, we can freeze the campaign funds immediately pending a comprehensive legal review." "I am sending the files right now," I assured him, hitting send on an email containing the official paramedic discharge papers and the Buckhead property deed. "You will see that the campaign organizers are currently attempting to commit federal wire fraud by soliciting donations across state lines using a fabricated medical emergency." "Documents received and verified, Ms. Brooks," the investigator replied, his tone shifting to absolute seriousness. "The campaign has been officially suspended. All collected funds are now frozen and will be automatically refunded to the original donors within 3 to 5 business days. The organizer's account has been permanently banned from our platform for violating our terms of service regarding deceptive medical solicitations." I thanked the investigator and ended the call. Julian smiled, kissing my temple. "That was incredibly efficient," he noted proudly. "Your parents are going to be furious when they realize their digital piggy bank just evaporated into thin air." "They are about to be much more than furious," I corrected softly, watching my phone screen light up with a new incoming call. The caller identification displayed a very prominent Atlanta phone number. "They are about to be socially excommunicated." I answered the ringing device, pressing the phone to my ear as we prepared to board our final flight. "Hello," I greeted smoothly. "Simone, this is Pastor Davis." The deep, authoritative voice of the megachurch leader boomed through the speaker. "We urgently need to discuss your mother." "Good afternoon, Pastor Davis," I replied calmly. I assume you are calling regarding the fraudulent fundraising campaign my parents launched. Simone, your parents came to my office in tears, Pastor Davis said. Evelyn is a pillar of our congregation. She served faithfully on the financial committee for a decade. To see her terrified of becoming homeless breaks my heart. We do not abandon our elders. They are not suffering, I stated. They are facing the consequences of their own negligence. I stopped paying for a mansion they secretly leveraged to fund my brother's gambling addiction. The details of their struggles are irrelevant, Pastor Davis lectured. Ephesians chapter 6 commands us to honor our father and mother. Freezing that charity campaign was vindictive. Your mother is severely ill. She collapsed at your reception. Release those funds and beg for forgiveness before you cause irreversible damage to their reputation in our church. I let his speech hang in the air. He genuinely believed Evelyn was a flawless martyr. He had no idea who he was actually defending. Pastor Davis, do you have your computer? I asked, opening my laptop. I am sitting at my desk, yes, he answered, but I do not see how my computer has anything to do with this. Please open your email, I instructed. I am sending you a document right now. Open it before you continue lecturing me about my mother's impeccable character. Simone, I do not have time for games, Pastor Davis huffed. I have a grieving family to comfort. Open the email, Pastor, I demanded. It directly concerns the financial security of your entire congregation. I heard the clicking of a computer mouse through the speaker. A second later, I heard a sharp intake of breath. What am I looking at? Pastor Davis asked, his booming voice dropping to a whisper. You are looking at a comprehensive financial audit, I explained. As you know, my company specializes in secure financial tracking. Evelyn asked me to help streamline the church's digital tithing system. She gave me administrative access to the primary bank accounts to set up the integration. While configuring the protocols, my systems flagged highly suspicious anomalies. Suspicious anomalies. Pastor Davis repeated, the previous arrogance absent from his tone. I ran a trace on the church's outgoing funds, I continued. If you look at page 4, you will see a detailed ledger. For 18 months, your esteemed church treasurer, Evelyn Brooks, has been systematically skimming money from the weekly tithes. She siphoned hundreds of disguised transactions, labeling them as miscellaneous administrative expenses and outreach programs. The line was silent save for the clicking of Pastor Davis scrolling furiously through the PDF document. Look at the routing numbers on page 7, I instructed. Every single stolen tithe transaction was funneled directly into offshore cryptocurrency trading accounts. Those specific accounts belong entirely to my brother Darius. Evelyn has been actively embezzling thousands of dollars from your faithful church members to cover the massive interest payments on Darius's failed financial investments. She stole from the offering plate to fund my brother's fake millionaire lifestyle. A heavy silence descended upon the phone call. I could practically hear the devastating reality crashing down on the megachurch leader. The woman he had fiercely defended, the woman he claimed was a pillar of the community, was a calculated thief who had been robbing his congregation blind right under his nose. This is undeniable, Pastor Davis whispered, his voice trembling with profound shock. The routing numbers match perfectly. The dates correspond exactly to the missing outreach funds we noticed last quarter. She told the board those funds were allocated to a youth shelter. My mother is a masterful liar, I stated plainly. She lied to me about my brother's finances. She lied to you about her heart condition. She lied to the internet to scam people out of $50,000. And she has been lying to your entire church every Sunday while stealing their hard-earned money. So, Pastor Davis, do you still want to lecture me about honoring my mother? I owe you an apology, Simone, Pastor Davis said. I spoke out of complete ignorance. I allowed myself to be manipulated by a woman I trusted implicitly. I do not need an apology, Pastor, I replied firmly. I just needed you to see the truth. My family uses their social standing in your church as a weapon. I am simply removing their ammunition. You have done much more than that. Pastor Davis responded, his tone cold and decisive. This church relies on the absolute trust of our congregation. We cannot tolerate financial exploitation of our members. Evelyn's actions are not just a sin, they are a severe criminal offense. What will you do? Julian asked softly from beside me. I am calling an emergency meeting with the board of directors immediately, Pastor Davis announced. We will freeze Evelyn's administrative access within 5 minutes. We will launch a full independent internal investigation into every single financial record from the past 5 years. Evelyn will be stripped of her title as church treasurer. She will be shunned by our community. She will likely try to deny it, I warned him. She will say I fabricated the digital audit out of spite. The bank records do not lie, Pastor Davis countered fiercely. I have the routing numbers right here in front of me. We will contact the authorities if she does not return every stolen penny immediately. Her social standing here is obliterated. She will never step inside our sanctuary again. I smiled, a deep sense of justice settling into my bones. Thank you for your time, Pastor Davis. I wish you luck. Julian and I have a honeymoon to enjoy. God bless you, Simone, the pastor replied quietly before terminating the connection. I lowered my phone, resting my head against the seat. The ultimate foundation of Evelyn's arrogant pride. Her prestigious church community had been permanently dismantled by her own blinding greed. The warm, tropical breeze of the Indian Ocean washed over us as Julian and I stepped off the private seaplane. We had finally arrived at our exclusive overwater villa in the Maldives. The crystal-clear turquoise water stretched endlessly toward the horizon, offering a perfect sanctuary away from the toxic wreckage we had left behind in Atlanta. Julian took my hand, guiding me onto the sun-drenched wooden deck. I closed my eyes, listening to the gentle lapping of the waves. It was the first moment of genuine peace I had experienced in months. The heavy burden of my family's relentless financial demands was completely gone. I was ready to unplug, unwind, and focus entirely on my incredible new husband. However, my malicious older brother had a different plan. My secure corporate mobile device, sitting quietly inside my woven beach bag, suddenly emitted a sharp, high-pitched alarm. It was not a standard text message or an email notification. It was a severe encrypted alert directly from the cybersecurity command center of my software company. Julian stopped unpacking our suitcases and looked over with concern. I pulled the device from my bag and unlocked the screen using my biometric scan. The bright red warning notification flashed urgently, detailing a highly unauthorized aggressive intrusion attempt on our primary database servers. Thousands of miles away, shivering in a cheap rundown motel room off the interstate, Darius was spiraling into absolute desperation. Brittany had officially abandoned him, leaving him with nothing but the ripped suit on his back. Evelyn and Richard were facing social ruin and impending eviction, completely unable to bail him out. His fake manufactured image as a wealthy crypto investor was completely shattered. Furious, humiliated, and desperate for quick cash, Darius decided to retaliate the only way he knew how. He opened his laptop and attempted to steal my livelihood. When I was initially building my software company in my parents' garage 5 years ago, Darius used to snoop around my workspace. He had secretly memorized an old administrative backdoor password I used during the early development phases. He assumed that because I was his younger sister, I was too careless to secure my own network. His malicious plan was incredibly predictable. He wanted to infiltrate my corporate servers, download my highly confidential client lists, and sell the lucrative event management data to my biggest corporate competitors. He thought he could steal millions of dollars worth of proprietary information to fund his empty, pathetic lifestyle. I sat down on the plush white sofa of our villa and opened a secure video conference link with my Chief Information Security Officer, Marcus. Marcus was sitting in our Atlanta headquarters, sipping a cup of coffee and looking highly amused. I asked for a full situation report. Marcus quickly confirmed that Darius was actively attempting to breach the network using the outdated administrative credentials. Julian sat beside me, his brow furrowed in anger, asking if we needed to shut down the main servers immediately to protect our high-end corporate clients. I smiled, shaking my head slowly. I told Julian there was absolutely no need to panic. I am a meticulous software engineer, and I do not leave massive vulnerabilities in my multi-million-dollar enterprise. When I legally transitioned my company from that dusty garage to a secure corporate headquarters, I did not just delete those old passwords. I anticipated that my greedy, entitled brother might eventually try to sabotage my success. I instructed Marcus and the tech team to deliberately leave that specific backdoor open, but I rerouted it entirely. We transformed it into a digital honeypot. A honeypot is an isolated, heavily monitored decoy server designed to lure in malicious hackers. Darius truly believed he had successfully bypassed my security firewalls. He thought he had hit the ultimate jackpot. Sitting in his dingy motel room, he eagerly began downloading hundreds of massive files labeled as premium client contracts, banking details, and proprietary algorithms. He was practically salivating at the thought of selling this stolen data on the corporate black market to destroy my career. He had no idea that every single file he was currently downloading was completely fake. The documents contained absolutely no real client information. Instead, they were massive, corrupted dummy files intricately laced with aggressive military-grade tracking software. Marcus shared his screen through the video conference, allowing Julian and me to watch the trap snap shut in real time. We watched the download progress bar hit 100%. The moment Darius opened the first counterfeit file on his personal laptop, the embedded tracking software instantly activated. "We have him," Marcus announced smoothly over the video call. "The tracking beacon just initiated a hard ping. He is connected to a public wireless network at a budget motel on the outskirts of the city. We have his exact internet protocol address, his unique media access control address, and his precise global positioning system coordinates." Darius had completely incriminated himself. He had actively committed corporate espionage and unauthorized access to a protected computer system. He foolishly thought he was stealing my fortune, but he had just handed me the ultimate weapon to destroy his entire life. I thanked Marcus for his excellent work and authorized him to lock down the honeypot server permanently. I did not call my brother to gloat. I did not text my parents to warn them. I opened a specialized legal portal on my computer. With cold, unwavering precision, I compiled the comprehensive server logs, the digital tracking data, and the undeniable proof of his malicious intrusion. Darius crossed a severe legal boundary that carried mandatory prison sentences. My parents had spent my entire life shielding him from the basic consequences of his terrible actions. Now, he would finally face a rigorous justice system that ignored his fabricated golden child status. I confidently filled out the official federal cyber trespass reporting forms. I attached all the required digital evidence files and firmly pressed submit. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cybercrime Division was officially notified. 2 weeks later, the pristine white sands and warm tropical breezes of the Maldives were replaced by the bustling concrete and towering steel architecture of downtown Atlanta. Julian and I returned from our spectacular honeymoon, completely refreshed, our bond stronger than ever. While we had been drinking fresh coconut water and swimming with manta rays, the federal justice system had been moving with terrifying speed. The digital evidence I submitted from our overwater villa had given the federal agents everything they needed to secure a swift no-knock search warrant. Darius was still hiding in his budget motel room, frantically trying to decipher the corrupted dummy files, when a heavily armed tactical team breached his cheap wooden door. My security director Marcus relayed the official police report to me during my first morning back in the corporate office. According to the federal affidavit, Darius was dragged out of his stained, unmade bed, wearing nothing but his boxer shorts. The agents confiscated his laptops, his external hard drives, and all his mobile devices. The golden child of the Brooks family was paraded through the dingy motel parking lot in heavy iron handcuffs, shoved aggressively into the back of an armored federal vehicle, and booked into the county jail on multiple felony charges of corporate espionage and cyber trespassing. His fabricated, arrogant billionaire persona was completely annihilated in front of the local news cameras that had caught wind of the morning raid. I was reviewing the quarterly revenue reports in my corner executive office, enjoying a fresh cup of espresso, when the heavy glass doors of my executive floor swung open violently. My receptionist, a sharp young woman named Valerie, stood up in immediate alarm, reaching for the security panic button under her desk. Evelyn and Richard had somehow slipped past the lobby security guards by aggressively tailgating a large catering delivery group into the secured elevator bank. They looked absolutely wretched. My mother, who usually refused to leave the house without a perfect salon blowout, and expensive designer makeup, wore a wrinkled, mismatched sweater. Her hair was completely unkempt, sticking out in wild directions. My father looked deeply aged, his broad shoulders slumped, his eyes carrying heavy dark bags of profound exhaustion. They were the very picture of total undeniable defeat. I did not call my security team to throw them out immediately. I simply placed my coffee cup down and steepled my fingers watching them approach my massive mahogany desk. The sheer contrast between my sleek multi-million-dollar corporate environment and their ruined, desperate state was absolute poetic justice. Before I could even ask them how they bypassed my building's strict security protocols, Evelyn did something I never thought I would witness in my entire lifetime. She threw herself onto the plush gray carpet of my office. Evelyn, the proud, arrogant matriarch who demanded absolute subservience from everyone around her, literally dropped to her knees. Richard followed a second later, his pride completely broken, kneeling right beside his weeping wife. They clasped their hands together, looking up at me like I was a merciful deity holding the keys to their salvation. "Simone, please!" Evelyn wailed, her voice cracking with raw, unbridled panic. "Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. You have to stop this." They took Darius. Federal agents locked him in a cell with violent criminals. He called us crying, terrified for his life. His bail is set at $250,000, and we do not have a single penny left to our names. You have to call the authorities and tell them it was all a big misunderstanding. Richard leaned forward, his voice a pathetic, trembling whisper. "We will do anything, Simone, anything you want. We are sorry for missing the wedding. We are sorry for everything. Just please drop the charges against your brother. If he gets a federal felony conviction, his life is permanently ruined. He will never be able to work again." I stared down at the two people who had gleefully celebrated my absence on my wedding day. They were not apologizing because they felt genuine remorse for treating me like a disposable cash machine. They were apologizing because the golden child was currently wearing an orange jumpsuit and they were completely powerless to rescue him. "You want me to call the federal authorities and claim that corporate espionage is just a family misunderstanding?" I asked, my voice echoing coldly through the spacious office. Darius attempted to steal proprietary algorithms to sell to my corporate competitors. He tried to destroy my livelihood to fund his fake lifestyle. "I was desperate," Evelyn sobbed, grabbing the edge of my mahogany desk with her shaking hands. "He made a foolish mistake, but you have all the money in the world now. It did not hurt you. Please, Simone, show some mercy. Name your price." I leaned back in my leather chair, letting their pathetic desperation saturate the room. This exact performance. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a thick, professionally bound legal folder. I tossed it onto the desk so it landed right in front of their tear-stained faces. "I will drop the massive civil damages lawsuit I filed against Darius," I announced smoothly. "I will sign the corporate waiver to withdraw the financial retaliation claim, which would have bankrupted him for the next 40 years. However, I am only doing this under one strict, non-negotiable condition." Evelyn and Richard looked up, a spark of frantic hope igniting in their bloodshot eyes. "Anything," Richard promised eagerly, nodding his head rapidly. "You will both sign this comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and a permanent cease and desist mandate," I instructed, pointing a manicured finger at the thick document. "By signing this, you legally and permanently forfeit any right to contact me, Julian, or any of my corporate employees ever again. You forfeit any future claim to my assets, my estate, or my business holdings. You will never speak my name in public or private. You will completely erase me from your existence, and I will erase you from mine. If you violate this agreement even once, I will sue you for $10 million. Evelyn did not even bother reading the intricate legal stipulations. She grabbed the silver pen from my desk with trembling, eager hands, deeply relieved to have supposedly secured her golden child's freedom. They furiously scribbled their signatures on every single page, grinning at each other through their tears, entirely convinced they had just outsmarted me and won. Richard pushed the signed legal documents across the mahogany desk, his chest puffed out with renewed arrogance. Evelyn wiped her tear-streaked face, her previous desperation instantly vanishing. She let out a triumphant laugh, believing she had successfully manipulated her wealthy daughter into saving her golden child from ruin. My corporate attorney, Mr. Sterling, stepped forward in his navy suit. He picked up the signed non-disclosure agreement and the cease and desist mandate, reviewing each page to ensure their signatures were legally binding. He nodded curtly at me, confirming that the trap had been fully secured. Evelyn stood up, brushing off her wrinkled sweater, her posture returning to its demanding stance. "Now, Simone," Evelyn ordered, her tone reverting to its familiar condescending sharpness. "Pick up your phone right now, call those federal agents and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them Darius had permission to access your servers. I has suffered enough in that filthy jail cell and I want my son released before dinner." I folded my hands and offered a pitying smile. "I cannot do that, Mother," I replied softly. Richard slammed his hand against the chair. "What do you mean you cannot do that?" he barked. "We signed your contracts. You gave us your word that you would drop the charges against your brother. Do not try to back out now, or I will sue you for fraud." "I strongly suggest you read the documents you just signed, Richard," Mr. Sterling interjected, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who billed $1,000 an hour. "My client promised to drop the corporate civil damages lawsuit against your son. She promised to withdraw her financial retaliation claim. She has kept her word. Those civil filings have been withdrawn from the county docket." "Why is he still locked up?" Evelyn shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "Cyber trespassing and corporate espionage are not civil disputes," I explained, leaning forward to deliver the final blow. "They are severe federal crimes. When Darius attempted to steal my proprietary algorithms to sell on the black market, he triggered an automatic federal investigation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not drop felony criminal charges just because a mother begs for it. The federal government is currently prosecuting your son, not me. I have no legal authority to stop a federal indictment." The smug expressions melted off their faces, replaced instantly by sheer horror. They stared at me as the terrifying reality of their situation crashed down upon them. They had permanently signed away their right to ever contact me, demand my money, or use my name in public. They isolated themselves from my wealth, hoping to save Darius, only to realize I had legally outmaneuvered them on every front. Darius was still going to federal prison, and now they had zero resources to hire him a defense attorney. "You tricked us!" Evelyn wailed, her voice cracking as her knees buckled slightly. "You tricked us into giving up everything. How is my son supposed to fight a federal prosecutor without your financial help? He needs a top-tier lawyer, Simone. You have to pay for his defense. He is your own flesh and blood. You signed an ironclad legal contract stating you will never ask me for money again," I reminded her coldly. "If you ask me for a single penny to fund his defense, you will violate the agreement and Mr. Sterling will sue you for $10 million. You wanted to protect your golden child. Now you get to watch him face the justice system completely alone with a free public defender." Richard turned a sickly shade of gray. He opened his mouth to scream at me, to hurl his usual barrage of insults and threats, but Mr. Sterling quickly raised a warning finger. "I must advise you, sir, that raising your voice or threatening my client in any capacity violates the cease and desist order you executed exactly 4 minutes ago," Mr. Sterling cautioned firmly. "Security is standing by to escort you off the premises. If you resist, you will be arrested for trespassing." They had nothing left to say. They were completely defeated, trapped by their own arrogant ignorance and my meticulous legal strategy. Evelyn began to weep hysterically, a loud, ugly sound that grated against my ears. But I felt zero sympathy for the woman who had happily mocked my wedding day. Marcus, my towering security director, stepped into the office and firmly grasped Richard by the arm. He led my weeping mother and my broken father out of my headquarters forever. I watched the heavy glass doors close behind them, sealing my professional sanctuary. I slowly exhaled and turned to Mr. Sterling, thanking him for his flawless execution of the paperwork. We had neutralized the primary threat to my peace. I was ready to get back to running my software empire and enjoying my new marriage. I reached for my espresso, taking a sip, when the intercom on my desk buzzed sharply. "Simone, I am sorry to interrupt." Valerie, my receptionist, said, her voice tight with confusion. "There is a gentleman out here in the lobby." He bypassed the main reception desk. He says he is a court-appointed process server and he has urgent legal documents specifically for you. My brow furrowed. I pressed the intercom button. Send him in, Valerie. A man in a cheap suit walked into my office. He asked if I was Simone Brooks. I confirmed my identity. He handed me a thick envelope and quickly exited the room. I ripped open the seal and pulled out the documents. It was a subpoena. My eyes scanned the aggressive legal jargon, landing on the plaintiff's name. It was from Brittany's divorce attorney. The heavy parchment paper of the subpoena felt almost comical. Brittany, desperate and facing the harsh reality of a broke, incarcerated husband, was petitioning the family court. She maliciously claimed my highly profitable software company was classified as family marital property because Darius had supposedly acted as an unpaid consultant during its inception. 2 weeks later, I walked confidently into the sleek conference room of the Fulton County Courthouse for the mandatory legal deposition. Julian squeezed my hand warmly before I entered, wishing me luck. I walked in flanked by my trusted corporate counsel, Mr. Sterling, and two associate litigators. Sitting across the polished mahogany table was Brittany. She wore a beige twin set that screamed calculated innocence, dabbing dry eyes with a tissue. Beside her sat her aggressive divorce attorney, Harrison Caldwell. He wore a flashy pinstripe suit, carrying an air of unearned superiority. Caldwell attempted to dominate the room. He leaned across the table, steepling his fingers, looking at me with a condescending smirk. I thought he could weaponize his legal jargon and inherent white privilege to intimidate a young black woman into a lucrative settlement. Ms. Brooks, Caldwell began, his tone dripping with patronizing faux sympathy. We know that family businesses can be incredibly messy. My client Brittany has suffered immense emotional and financial trauma due to your brother's federal incarceration. We have sworn affidavits from your parents stating that Darius provided critical foundational sweat equity when you were building this software platform in their garage. Under Georgia law, any asset developed with marital resources or labor during the marriage is subject to equitable distribution. We are asking for a modest 20% equity buyout to settle this quietly. If you refuse, we will freeze your corporate assets during a highly public discovery phase. I did not blink. I did not shift in my leather chair. I looked directly at Brittany, who had stopped pretending to cry so she could offer me a smug, victorious smile. She truly believed throwing legal threats and her parents' fabricated testimonies at me would force me to open my checkbook and fund her new life. Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Sterling interjected, his voice as smooth and deadly as a drawn blade. Are you quite finished lecturing my client on fundamental family law? Because if you are, I would like to introduce you to federal corporate law. Mr. Sterling opened his thick leather briefcase. He extracted 3 heavy, immaculately bound stacks of financial documents and slid them across the polished table. They hit Caldwell's hands with a loud thud that made Brittany physically jump in her seat. Exhibit A, Mr. Sterling announced. These are the certified incorporation documents from Delaware. S&J Holdings was incorporated exactly 3 years after Ms. Brooks moved out of her parents' garage. Exhibit B is a forensic financial audit conducted by an independent accounting firm. It proves down to the very last cent that $0 of commingled family money, Darius's money, or Brittany's money, ever entered my client's corporate accounts. Caldwell's smug expression faltered immediately. He hurriedly flipped through the crisp pages, his eyes darting frantically across the undeniable financial ledgers that systematically dismantled his entire predatory case. And finally, Exhibit C, I added, leaning forward so Brittany could see the cold fire in my eyes. Those are the digital access logs from my company's inception to the present day. Darius never wrote a single line of code. He never held an advisory role. The only time your husband ever attempted to interact with my corporate servers was 2 weeks ago, when he committed the federal cybercrime he is currently sitting in jail for. Your in-laws are legally barred by a signed non-disclosure agreement from testifying about my assets, making their affidavits void and highly actionable. Brittany's smug smile vanished instantly. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale. Harrison, do something, Brittany hissed, grabbing her lawyer's arm. You told me we had a solid claim to her money. You said she would settle out of court to avoid bad press. You have absolutely nothing, Brittany, I stated, my voice echoing in the silent conference room. You thought you could leverage your tears and a bully in a pinstripe suit to steal the wealth I built with my own two hands. You thought I would hand over millions of dollars because you felt entitled. You made a massive, fatal miscalculation. Mr. Sterling pulled out one final document. We are not just rejecting your absurd settlement offer, Mr. Caldwell. We are actively filing a motion for Rule 11 sanctions against you and your client for pursuing demonstrably frivolous and malicious litigation. We are countersuing Brittany for the total sum of our legal fees. The deposition ended in absolute chaos for their side. We immediately moved into the judge's chambers for the preliminary hearing. The family court judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for legal extortion, reviewed our ironclad corporate documents. She looked at Caldwell's flimsy, unverified affidavits with visible disgust. The ruling was swift, brutal, and entirely in my favor. This court finds the plaintiff's claims to be entirely baseless and bordering on extortion, the judge declared loudly, banging her wooden gavel. The petition to attach Ms. Brooks's corporate assets is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am granting the defense's motion for sanctions. The plaintiff, Brittany Brooks, is hereby ordered to pay $25,000 to cover the defendant's attorney fees. Payment is due within 30 days. Brittany let out a loud, strangled sob. She slumped forward in her chair, burying her face in her trembling hands. She had tried to rob me to fund her escape from Darius. Instead, the judge had just thrown out her entire case and slapped her with a massive, insurmountable legal bill. She was walking out of this courthouse completely bankrupt, with no luxury car, no wealthy husband, and absolutely no access to my fortune. She had nothing left but the devastating consequences of her own blinding greed. Exactly 30 days had passed since that spectacular wedding reception. The legal countdown for the eviction notice had officially expired at midnight. I sat in the back of my chauffeured black SUV, staring through the tinted windows at the towering wrought iron gates of the Buckhead mansion. Julian held my hand, his presence a steady anchor against the incoming storm. Right behind us, 3 marked Fulton County Sheriff Patrol cruisers idled in the driveway, their blue lights flashing silently in the crisp morning air. Mr. Sterling stood by the lead vehicle, holding the court-ordered writ of possession. Evelyn and Richard had ignored every single legal warning. They had foolishly convinced themselves that a daughter would never actually evict her own parents. They were about to learn that I was no longer the daughter they could manipulate. We stepped out of the vehicles and approached the main entrance. The heavy gates were chained shut from the inside with thick industrial padlocks. Through the manicured hedges, I could see a large, battered moving truck parked haphazardly on the front lawn, crushing the expensive landscaping. The massive mahogany front doors of the mansion were barricaded behind stacks of heavy patio furniture. Suddenly, the second-story balcony doors flew open. Richard stepped out, wearing a stained bathrobe and clutching a cup of coffee. He looked down at the armed deputies and me with an expression of absolute delusional defiance. "You have no right to be here, Simone," Richard bellowed over the balcony railing, his voice echoing across the affluent neighborhood. "This is my house. I paid the original down payment 15 years ago. You cannot just throw us out onto the street like common criminals. We are not leaving. I will call the news stations and tell them how you treat your elderly parents." The lead sheriff stepped forward, raising his megaphone. "Richard Brooks, this is the Fulton County Sheriff Office. We hold a valid writ of possession signed by a Superior Court judge. You are illegally trespassing. If you do not open these gates and surrender the premises immediately, we will breach the property, and you will be removed by force." Richard scoffed, giving us a dismissive wave before retreating inside and locking the balcony doors. The sheriff did not hesitate. He signaled his deputies. They retrieved heavy bolt cutters from their cruiser, snapping the gate chains in seconds. We marched up the long driveway. 2 deputies used a battering ram to smash through the front doors, sending the barricade of patio furniture tumbling across the marble foyer. I stepped inside the house and immediately stopped dead in my tracks. The sheer scale of the devastation was breathtaking. Evelyn and Richard had not just overstayed their legal welcome. They had maliciously gutted the property in a desperate, vindictive attempt to steal anything of value. The massive imported Swarovski crystal chandelier that used to hang in the grand foyer was completely gone, leaving only jagged electrical wires dangling from the ceiling. The custom marble countertops in the kitchen had been brutally smashed and pried off the cabinets. As we walked further into the residence, the destruction grew even worse. "What is that smell?" Julian asked, covering his nose as a strong metallic scent hit us. The walls in the formal dining room and the primary bathrooms had been violently hacked open with sledgehammers. They had literally ripped the expensive copper plumbing pipes straight out of the drywall. The hardwood floors were flooded with standing water from the broken connections. Evelyn emerged from the kitchen dragging a heavy trash bag filled with expensive stainless steel kitchen appliances. She froze when she saw the armed deputies filling her hallway. "What are you doing in my house?" Evelyn shrieked, dropping the trash bag. The heavy clatter of stolen silver echoed loudly. "We are packing our personal belongings. You gave us 30 days and we are leaving today. Tell these officers to back off immediately." I stepped forward, stepping carefully over a puddle of murky water. "You ripped the copper pipes out of the walls, Evelyn," I stated, my voice ringing with cold disbelief. "You stole the crystal chandeliers. You smashed the marble countertops. You destroyed hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of structural property." "It belongs to me!" Evelyn screamed, her face contorting into an ugly mask of pure greed. "We installed those chandeliers 10 years ago. We paid for that copper. If you are going to kick us out of our own home, we are taking our investments with us. We need the cash to secure a new apartment because you selfishly cut off our allowance. We are selling those fixtures to a scrapyard today, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it." Richard came running down the stairs, carrying a crowbar but instantly dropped it when the deputies unholstered their tasers. Mr. Sterling stepped beside me, surveying the catastrophic structural damage with a deeply critical eye. "Under Georgia real estate law, attached fixtures are the legal property of the current deed holder," he explained calmly to the furious couple. "You do not own those chandeliers or those copper pipes. S&J Holdings owns them." I turned to the lead sheriff, who was already signaling his team to block the driveway. I pointed directly at the battered moving truck sitting on my crushed lawn. "Sheriff, please stop that moving truck from leaving the premises," I commanded firmly, locking eyes with my terrified mother. "I would like to officially press felony charges against these two individuals for grand larceny and the malicious destruction of private corporate property." The heavy crowbar hit the wet floor loudly as Richard took a sudden step backward in sheer terror. Evelyn let out a piercing scream. She finally realized her foolish plan to steal a quick profit had just sealed her absolute doom. They were completely trapped now, with no escape. The armed deputies swiftly moved forward across the ruined room. They pulled out shining steel handcuffs. The cold metal locked around Evelyn's wrists with a definitive, sharp click that echoed over the rushing water in the ruined foyer. She gasped, staring down at the shining steel handcuffs in absolute disbelief. Richard tried to pull his arm away from the advancing deputy, sputtering empty threats, but he was swiftly subdued. Another pair of handcuffs secured his wrists behind his back. The lead sheriff read them their Miranda rights, his voice cutting through their hysterical protests. I watched my parents, the people who had always demanded absolute respect, being marched out of the very mansion they had tried to steal from me. Julian wrapped his arm around my waist as we followed them down the long driveway. The scene outside was a nightmare for anyone obsessed with high society status. Several of the wealthy Buckhead neighbors had stepped out of their sprawling estates to watch the spectacle. Evelyn tried to hide her face behind her messy hair, sobbing loudly as the deputies guided her toward the back of the marked patrol cruiser. Richard kept his head down, completely humiliated as the heavy doors slammed shut. They were transported directly to the Fulton County Jail, stripped of their designer clothing and forced to take booking mugshots. The arrogant matriarch of the megachurch was processed like a common criminal, fingerprinted, and placed into a crowded holding cell. It took them 12 agonizing hours to arrange their release. With their bank accounts frozen and their assets seized, they had to beg a shady bail bondsman to post the exorbitant collateral. When they finally walked out of the detention center into the humid Atlanta night, they possessed absolutely nothing. They had no luxury vehicles, no prestigious address, and zero dignity left. They were homeless, facing severe felony indictments that carried mandatory state prison sentences. Instead of accepting their defeat, their bruised egos pushed them toward one final desperate act of retaliation. They convinced themselves my supportive husband was the mastermind behind their downfall. The very next afternoon, Julian was finishing a complex orthopedic consultation at Atlanta General Hospital. He was standing in the brightly lit surgical waiting room, discussing post-operative care with a team of esteemed senior surgeons and wealthy donors. Suddenly, the automatic glass doors slid open violently. Evelyn and Richard stormed into the sterile hospital environment, bringing their chaotic, toxic energy into my husband's professional sanctuary. Evelyn immediately threw herself onto the pristine tile floor, clutching her chest and wailing at the top of her lungs. She put on the most dramatic, unhinged performance of her life, hoping to shame Julian in front of his prestigious medical colleagues. Richard marched directly toward Julian, his face twisted in a desperate, ugly snarl. He pointed a trembling finger at my husband's crisp white lab coat. "You are a monster!" Richard screamed, his voice echoing down the surgical corridor and startling several recovering patients. "You brainwashed our beautiful daughter. You manipulated Simone into throwing her own elderly parents into a jail cell. You made her evict us from our family home. Tell your colleagues the truth about what a controlling predator you really are. Call Simone right now and force her to drop those felony charges, or I swear I will ruin your medical career." Senior surgeons and attending nurses froze in absolute shock. Evelyn continued to sob loudly on the floor, crying out to the bewildered hospital staff that Julian had stolen her daughter. They expected Julian to panic. They anticipated that a respected chief of surgery would do absolutely anything to quickly quiet down a massive public scandal in his workplace. They fundamentally underestimated the man I married. Julian did not flush with embarrassment. He did not raise his voice, and he certainly did not reach for his phone to call me. He maintained the exact same cold, calculated composure that made him a brilliant surgeon. He simply reached into the breast pocket of his white coat and retrieved his hospital communication radio. He pressed the emergency button, calmly requesting maximum security to the surgical waiting room. Within 30 seconds, 4 heavily built hospital security officers rushed into the corridor surrounding the frantic couple. "Dr. Brooks, do we need to contact the local police?" the lead security officer asked, eyeing Richard's aggressive posture. "That will not be necessary just yet," Julian replied smoothly. He reached into his leather briefcase resting on the reception desk. He pulled out a thick, court-stamped legal folder and handed it directly to the lead security officer. "These two individuals are Richard and Evelyn Brooks. They are currently out on bail for grand larceny. More importantly, that document is a permanent standing restraining order signed by a superior court judge. My wife and I filed it proactively yesterday morning. It explicitly prohibits these individuals from coming within 500 feet of our residence, our corporate offices, or my hospital." Richard's jaw dropped. Evelyn's fake sobbing stopped instantly. The security officer reviewed the official document, his expression hardening. He looked down at Evelyn, who was still sitting on the sterile floor. "You are currently in direct violation of a standing judicial order," the security officer announced firmly, resting his hand on his utility belt. "You have exactly 10 seconds to stand up and walk out those glass doors voluntarily. If you are still inside this building on the 11th second, I will detain you both and call the police to arrest you for violating a restraining order, which will immediately revoke your current bail status." Realizing they were seconds away from being thrown back into a jail cell, Richard grabbed Evelyn by the arm, hauling her roughly to her feet. They scrambled backward toward the exit, their faces pale with pure terror. Julian adjusted his stethoscope, his expression completely unbothered. He watched my parents scurry out of the hospital sliding doors like frightened rats fleeing a sinking ship. They were officially and permanently banned from the premises, completely stripped of their final, pathetic attempt to regain control. The humiliating hospital ejection marked the absolute end of their social reign in Atlanta, with the Buckhead mansion legally repossessed and their faces plastered across local gossip blogs. Following the taser incident, Evelyn and Richard had nowhere left to hide. They had no luxury vehicles, no prestigious address, and their remaining savings were vaporizing to cover mounting legal fees for their grand larceny trial. Their so-called friends from the megachurch abandoned them, treating them like pariahs. Desperation forces people to make incredibly short-sighted decisions. With hundreds of thousands in unsecured debt and zero income, my parents were officially backed into a financial corner. They had absolutely no choice but to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, hoping to wipe their slate clean. They hired a cheap, overworked bankruptcy attorney who operated out of a strip mall. Evelyn, clinging to delusions of grandeur, believed the bankruptcy court would simply erase their massive debts and allow them to start over. She thought the legal system would pity an older, formerly wealthy couple. They walked into the federal bankruptcy courthouse in downtown Atlanta, expecting a routine, sympathetic administrative process. They wore their best remaining court attire, attempting to project an aura of dignified victimhood. They were entirely unprepared for the meticulous, ruthless scrutiny of a federal bankruptcy trustee. I did not attend the hearing personally. My corporate attorney, Mr. Sterling, sent a junior associate to observe the public proceedings and report back. According to the detailed transcript I received later that afternoon, the hearing began exactly as expected. The federal trustee, a sharp, no-nonsense accountant named Arthur Pendleton, systematically reviewed their listed assets and liabilities. Evelyn dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of a devastated mother, financially ruined by a vindictive daughter. Richard sat beside her, nodding solemnly, trying to garner sympathy from the presiding judge. The proceedings took a sharp, disastrous turn when Mr. Pendleton directed his attention to the original financing of the Buckhead mansion. He pulled out a stack of manila folders, adjusting his reading glasses as he scrutinized the complex financial history. The trustee noted that 3 years prior, Richard and Evelyn had secured a massive second mortgage on the property to fund Darius and his failed cryptocurrency venture. The sheer size of the loan did not align with their verifiable income at the time. Mr. Pendleton began asking highly specific, pointed questions regarding the financial disclosures submitted on those mortgage applications. Richard, attempting to deflect the intense scrutiny, immediately reverted to his favorite defense mechanism. He aggressively threw me under the bus. He loudly testified under oath that I, his ruthless software developer daughter, had managed all of their finances. Richard falsely claimed that I had maliciously manipulated the mortgage paperwork without their knowledge, forcing them to sign documents they did not understand. Evelyn eagerly chimed in, weeping to the judge that I had orchestrated their entire financial downfall to steal their beloved home. They thought lying to a federal court would successfully shift the blame and expedite their debt discharge. They made a catastrophic, fatal error. Mr. Pendleton did not simply take their word for it. He produced the original certified copies of the mortgage applications submitted to the bank 3 years ago. The documents were fully projected onto the courtroom monitors for the judge to see. The trustee methodically pointed out that the applications contained grossly inflated asset valuations, fabricated business revenue streams, and entirely forged tax returns. More importantly, Mr. Pendleton presented the digital footprint of the submissions. The applications were processed, signed, and submitted by Richard and Evelyn directly, months before I stepped in to purchase their bad debt. Mr. Brooks, the trustee stated, his voice echoing coldly in the silent courtroom, these documents clearly show that you and your wife intentionally submitted fraudulent financial records to a federally insured institution to secure a loan you could not afford. Your daughter's name does not appear anywhere on these original applications, nor do the digital submission logs trace back to her corporate IP addresses. You personally certified these fabricated tax returns under penalty of perjury. Richard's face drained of all color. He stammered frantically, looking at his cheap attorney for help, but his lawyer was already pushing his chair away, distancing himself from his radioactive clients. Evelyn stopped her fake crying instantly. The realization of what they had just admitted to on the official court record crashed over them. They had not just lied to a bank. They had perjured themselves in front of a federal bankruptcy judge while trying to frame me for their own financial crimes. The presiding judge leaned forward over the elevated wooden bench. Her expression was a terrifying mask of unyielding judicial fury. She slammed her gavel down with a sharp crack that made Evelyn jump in her seat. The judge stated that the bankruptcy court does not exist to shield criminals from the consequences of their deliberate, calculated fraud. This court has zero tolerance for individuals who attempt to manipulate the federal bankruptcy system while actively concealing egregious financial misconduct, the judge declared loudly. Your petition for federal bankruptcy discharge is suspended indefinitely. Furthermore, based on the undeniable evidence of falsified loan applications and fabricated tax returns presented today, I am officially referring this matter to the United States Attorney's Office for immediate criminal investigation. Evelyn let out a loud, strangled gasp, clutching her chest, as true panic finally set in. Richard sat completely paralyzed, staring blankly at the polished wooden table. The judge's words echoed with terrifying finality. The civil bankruptcy hearing had instantly transformed into a massive federal criminal probe. By lying on those mortgage applications to fund Darius, they had committed textbook wire fraud and bank fraud against a federally insured institution. They realized in that chilling moment that they were no longer just facing local state charges for ripping copper pipes out of my walls. They were now looking down the barrel of a federal indictment facing years in a federal penitentiary. 3 months after that disastrous bankruptcy hearing, the federal justice system delivered its next crushing blow to the Brooks family legacy. The grand courtroom inside the Richard B. Russell Federal Building felt entirely different from the state courts they were used to. It was colder, strictly regulated, and completely immune to Evelyn's performative weeping. Darius was seated at the defendant's table. He wore a poorly fitted beige suit that swallowed his newly gaunt frame. The golden child who once paraded around Buckhead in leased luxury cars looked absolutely terrified. Beside him sat his legal representation. Without access to my corporate wealth, Darius could not afford the elite silver-tongued defense attorneys who usually protected Atlanta's upper echelon. Instead, he was assigned a heavily overworked public defender who looked completely exhausted before the trial even began. Darius had spent the last several months rotating between county jail and federal holding facilities waiting for a trial he was destined to lose. The digital honeypot my cybersecurity team had engineered was flawless. The federal prosecutors had an ironclad digital trail proving Darius attempted to download proprietary algorithms to sell to foreign competitors. His public defender had bluntly informed him that a jury trial would result in a guaranteed conviction with a maximum sentence. Left with absolutely no leverage and no wealthy sister to write a miraculous settlement check, Darius was forced into a corner. He had to accept a binding plea agreement. I sat quietly in the second row of the spectator gallery, dressed in a sharp black tailored suit. Julian sat closely beside me, his steady presence grounding me in the solemn environment. We watched as the federal judge entered the courtroom, her black robes rustling against the heavy silence. She asked Darius to stand. He rose on shaky legs, keeping his head bowed low, avoiding eye contact with the gallery. The judge read the formal charges of corporate espionage and cyber trespassing. She asked him how he pleaded. Darius swallowed hard, his voice barely a weak, trembling whisper. He pleaded guilty. The judge did not hesitate to deliver the consequences of his blinding greed. She sentenced my older brother to 36 months in a federal penitentiary, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The heavy thud of the judge's wooden gavel echoed with brutal finality. The absolute reality of a 3-year federal prison sentence struck the Brooks family like a physical tidal wave. Evelyn, sitting 2 rows ahead of me, completely lost whatever fragile composure she had left. She let out an agonizing, gut-wrenching wail that pierced the quiet courtroom. She collapsed against the wooden pew, sobbing violently as the federal marshals stepped forward to place the heavy iron cuffs around Darius's wrists. He was no longer her brilliant, successful son. He was officially a convicted federal inmate. As the marshals guided him toward the holding doors, Evelyn twisted around in her seat. She locked her tear-filled, desperate eyes onto mine. Her face was a messy portrait of utter devastation, silently begging me for a shred of sympathy, hoping I would finally break down and comfort the mother who had always treated me as a disposable asset. I did not flinch. I did not offer a comforting smile. I simply stared back at her, completely emotionless, my face, an impenetrable mask of pure stone. She had celebrated my absence on my wedding day. She had stolen from my accounts. She had tried to destroy my home. Any lingering daughterly affection I possessed had been burned away months ago. Evelyn let out a choked gasp, finally realizing the chilling truth. I was completely gone and she was entirely alone in her misery. The bailiffs began clearing the courtroom. Julian placed his hand gently on the small of my back, guiding me out into the wide, marble-lined hallway of the federal courthouse. I felt incredibly light, as if a massive, suffocating chain had finally been severed from my neck. Justice had been unequivocally served. My company was safe. My boundaries were fortified. We were walking toward the main elevators when a harsh voice called out my name. I turned around to see Richard stepping out from the shadows of the corridor. My father looked desperate and dangerously unhinged. His suit was wrinkled and a layer of nervous sweat coated his forehead. Evelyn was nowhere in sight, likely still weeping in the courtroom lobby. Richard closed the distance between us, rapidly blocking my path to the elevators. Julian immediately stepped forward, positioning himself defensively between us, but I gently placed a hand on my husband's shoulder. I wanted to hear exactly what my ruined father had to say. "Do you feel like a big winner now, Simone?" Richard hissed, his voice a low, venomous growl. "You just sent your own flesh and blood to a federal prison. Your mother is having a breakdown, and we are facing our own federal indictments because of you. But do not think for one second that you have won this war. You think you are completely untouchable just because you have a fancy corporate office and a medical husband." I crossed my arms, staring at him with bored indifference. "You are blocking my exit, Richard. I highly suggest you step aside before I call the federal marshals stationed down the hall." Richard leaned in closer, a sickening, desperate smirk twisting his lips. He was a cornered animal, willing to try one last pathetic maneuver to regain control. "I still have connections in this city," Richard threatened, jabbing his finger toward my chest. "I know reporters. I know prominent members of your industry. If you do not wire $500,000 to an offshore account by tomorrow morning to help your mother and me flee this impending bank fraud indictment, I am going to release a fabricated scandal to the press. I will tell your major shareholders that your software algorithms are actively stealing client financial data. I will tell them you are currently under a secret SEC investigation." Never. I stared directly into his bloodshot eyes, unfazed by his threats. "You are fundamentally delusional, Richard," I stated, my voice echoing off the marble walls. "You actually believe a fabricated rumor about a SEC investigation will force me to wire $500,000. You think your empty words can shatter an empire built on financial transparency. You just demanded a massive sum of money under the threat of corporate sabotage. Do you realize what you just did?" Richard sneered, oblivious to the trap. "I did what I have to do to survive," he spat, jabbing his finger. "I am protecting my family. You left us with nothing, Simone. You got your mother and me investigated for bank fraud. I will not sit back and let you ruin us without dragging you down. You have exactly 24 hours to authorize that transfer. If the money is not in my account tomorrow, your shareholders will force you to resign in disgrace." I held eye contact. I slowly reached into the pocket of my blazer and retrieved my smartphone. The screen was displaying an active voice memo application. The recording timer was ticking, capturing every single word of his malicious extortion attempt clearly. I tilted the screen so Richard could clearly see the damning evidence of his criminality. "Georgia is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, Richard." I explained, my tone cold and final. "I do not need your permission to record this. You just committed felony extortion. You committed this felony while on bail for grand larceny and destruction of property. You committed this felony while under a federal investigation for wire fraud. You just handed me the exact weapon I need to permanently revoke your bail and lock you in a cell right next to your precious son." Richard's eyes bulged in sheer terror. The arrogant sneer melted off his face instantly. He lunged forward, his hands grasping for my device, desperate to destroy the digital evidence. Julian reacted quickly. My husband stepped in front of me, catching Richard by the shoulders and forcefully shoving him backward against the heavy oak doors of the courtroom lobby. "Do not even think about touching my wife," Julian warned, his voice a dangerous rumble. I did not waste another second. I turned and walked down the corridor, heading toward the federal prosecutor who had just secured Darius's conviction. The prosecutor was standing near the security checkpoint, chatting with two United States Marshals. I approached them directly, holding up my phone. I requested their immediate attention and pressed play on the audio file. Richard's aggressive, threatening voice filled the quiet hallway, demanding $500,000 to prevent a fabricated corporate scandal. The federal prosecutor's eyes narrowed as he listened to the proof of felony extortion. Extorting a federal witness and a victim of a related crime was a massive violation of the judicial process. He gave a swift nod to the two federal marshals standing beside him. They unclipped their tactical handcuffs and marched purposefully down the corridor toward my father. Richard was still recovering from Julian's defensive shove when the marshals descended upon him. He tried to backpedal, holding his hands up in a pathetic surrender. "Wait, this is just a massive misunderstanding," Richard stammered, sweat pouring down his pale face. "She is my daughter. We were just having a private family disagreement. It was a joke. I was not actually going to extort her. You cannot arrest me for having an argument." The federal marshals did not care about his pathetic excuses. They grabbed him by both arms, spinning him around forcefully and slamming him face first against the cold marble wall. They kicked his legs apart and wrenched his arms behind his back. The heavy steel handcuffs locked around his wrists with a sharp click. They loudly read him his Miranda rights, informing him that he was being detained for felony extortion and violating the strict conditions of his active bail agreement. Richard squeezed his eyes shut, letting out a whimper of absolute defeat as his arrest crushed his spirit. At that exact moment, the heavy double doors of the courtroom lobby swung open. Evelyn emerged clutching a damp tissue, her eyes red and swollen from sobbing over Darius's prison sentence. She stopped dead in her tracks. Her jaw dropped open in pure, unadulterated horror as she witnessed her husband being firmly pinned against the wall by federal law enforcement. "Richard!" Evelyn screamed, her voice cracking in pure panic. She tried to run toward him, but a third court security officer stepped into her path, holding up a stern hand to block her frantic advance. "What are you doing to my husband? Leave him alone. We have already lost our son today." "Your husband is under arrest for felony extortion, ma'am," the marshal stated coldly. "He will be transported to the federal holding facility immediately. His bail is officially revoked." Evelyn watched in agonizing, paralyzed silence as the marshals marched Richard down the long corridor, leading him toward the secure elevator designated for federal inmates. He did not look back. He kept his head bowed, thoroughly humiliated and utterly destroyed. Evelyn slowly turned her head, her wide, terrified eyes locking onto me. She was standing completely alone on the cold courthouse steps. Her golden child was being processed for a federal prison sentence. Her husband was locked in handcuffs, facing a guaranteed jail cell without bail. Her stolen wealth was entirely gone. I stood securely beside my husband, wrapped in his embrace, surrounded by the untouchable fortress of my own corporate success. I did not offer her a comforting smile. I did not shed a single tear for her self-inflicted misery. I stared back at the broken woman who proudly called me a failure on my wedding day. Evelyn finally understood the magnitude of her actions. She was left entirely alone, trapped in a nightmare of her own making, while her daughter remained completely untouchable forever. 6 months passed since that defining afternoon on the courthouse steps. While the Brooks family legacy crumbled into federal indictments and prison sentences, my trajectory skyrocketed. S&J Holdings, the software platform they maliciously dismissed as a garage hobby, reached unprecedented heights. We officially closed a $50 million Series B funding round. The massive injection of venture capital solidified our dominance in the event management sector. The industry magazines that once ignored me were requesting exclusive cover features. I was no longer just a successful software developer. I was a recognized titan in the Atlanta technology scene, completely untethered from the toxic anchors of my past. To commemorate this monumental milestone, I hosted a lavish gala. I rented the spectacular atrium of the High Museum of Art in Midtown Atlanta. The space was a breathtaking vision of modern elegance, featuring soaring white walls, contemporary sculptures, and large windows overlooking the glowing city skyline. I stood at the top of the grand staircase wearing a stunning silver evening gown that caught the ambient light with every fluid movement. Julian stood proudly by my side in a sharp black tuxedo, his hand resting warmly on my lower back. I looked down at the main floor, taking in the incredible sight before me. The stark contrast between this magnificent celebration and my lonely bridal suite at the St. Regis 6 months prior was staggering. Back then, I stared into a vanity mirror, while my blood relatives abandoned me to go car shopping. Tonight, the museum atrium was packed with over 300 guests who genuinely cherished my presence. This was my beautifully curated chosen family, my loyal employees who worked tirelessly alongside me during those grueling 80-hour startup weeks were laughing and clinking champagne flutes. My brilliant corporate legal team, including Mr. Sterling, occupied a VIP table, enjoying the premium open bar. Most importantly, Julian's entire extended family showed up in full force. His parents, aunts, and cousins surrounded me with the kind of unconditional, radiant love I never experienced growing up. They simply loved the woman who made Julian happy. Julian's mother, an elegant and warm-hearted retired schoolteacher, walked up the stairs and pulled me into a deep, genuine embrace. She told me how incredibly proud she was of my resilience and my brilliant mind. She did not ask me for a single dollar. She did not throw subtle, racially charged microaggressions like my former sister-in-law, Brittany. She just offered pure, unadulterated maternal affection. I hugged her back tightly, realizing in that profound moment that I had not lost a family when I cut off Evelyn and Richard. I actually gained one. I finally purged the venomous infection from my life, creating an abundance of space for healthy, nurturing relationships to flourish. The evening flowed flawlessly. The catering was exquisite. The jazz band kept the energy high, and the speeches delivered by my lead investors highlighted my unwavering integrity. I felt invincible. I was floating on a cloud of absolute victory, savoring the delicious reality that my abusers were sitting in jail cells and cheap apartments while I stood at the pinnacle of my career. The gala was reaching its energetic peak when I stepped away from the crowded dance floor to grab a glass of sparkling water from a quieter bar near the museum entrance. My executive assistant Maya approached me with a hesitant, uncomfortable expression on her face. She held a small, crumpled piece of mail in her manicured hands. Maya explained that the venue security team intercepted a cheap courier who insisted on hand-delivering a priority envelope directly to me, because it bypassed our usual corporate mail screening process and was marked as highly urgent. Security handed it over to her. I set my water glass down on the marble bar counter. The envelope was battered, stained with coffee rings, and sealed with a cheap piece of clear tape. The stark contrast between this filthy piece of garbage and the immaculate, luxurious surroundings of the art museum was jarring. I did not need to open it to know who it came from. I immediately recognized the frantic, slanted handwriting scrawled across the front. It was addressed simply to Simona Brooks, ignoring my married name entirely. I took the envelope from Maya, my manicured fingers breaking the cheap tape. I pulled out a single sheet of lined yellow notebook paper. The ink was heavily smeared in several places, indicating that the writer had been crying while writing it. The desperate, pathetic words jumped off the page, instantly transporting me back to the reality of the people I left behind in the dirt. It was a handwritten letter from Evelyn. The woman who proudly called me a ghetto petty failure in front of hundreds of people was now reduced to begging on a torn piece of notebook paper. She wrote that Richard was locked in a federal holding facility, awaiting his trial for wire fraud and extortion. Darius was transferred to a medium-security federal penitentiary in another state. Brittany swiftly filed for divorce and completely abandoned them, taking her fake designer bags and moving in with a mechanic. Evelyn was entirely alone. She detailed her miserable new existence, living in a run-down, roach-infested studio apartment on the far outskirts of the city. Her church friends completely blacklisted her after the embezzlement scandal broke. The letter did not contain a single shred of genuine apology for the lifetime of abuse she inflicted upon me. It did not express any remorse for attempting to steal my mansion or ruining my wedding day. It was simply a frantic, groveling plea for cash. Evelyn begged me, the daughter she gleefully discarded, to wire a mere $500 to her new bank account, just so she could keep the electricity from being shut off by the utility company tomorrow morning. I stood completely still, staring at the desperate, frantic scribbles on the yellow notebook paper. The sheer audacity of her request was almost physically jarring. After orchestrating a lifetime of relentless emotional abuse, after attempting to steal my home and ruin my wedding day, Evelyn truly believed that a pathetic sob story would magically erase her unforgivable actions. She actually thought the unbreakable, solid boundaries I had built over the last 6 months would suddenly crumble today over a threatened utility shutoff. I folded the disgusting handwritten letter with precise, slow, deliberate movements. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel the familiar suffocating guilt that used to control every aspect of my adult life. I just felt an overwhelming, magnificent sense of absolute freedom. I walked away from this crowded, noisy bar area, carefully navigating through the stunning modern art exhibits until I finally reached the secluded outdoor terrace of the art museum. The cool Atlanta night air brushed against my bare shoulders. I leaned against the thick glass railing, looking out over the sprawling, illuminated city skyline. Down below, the relentless, noisy traffic of Peachtree Street formed an endless, beautiful river of glowing red and white lights. This city used to feel like a massive, gilded cage built entirely by my parents' ridiculous social expectations. Now it was my absolute kingdom. I owned my space here, completely unbothered by the toxic noise that used to drown out my own voice. For a brief, deeply quiet moment, I allowed myself to fully reflect on the generational curse I had successfully broken. My parents had operated under the dangerous assumption that biological ties granted them an unlimited, irrevocable pass to inflict pain. They weaponized the concept of family to extract money, demand blind loyalty, and enforce a destructive hierarchy that placed Darius on a pedestal while leaving me to beg for scraps. They were wrong. Love is not a financial debt you owe to your abusers. Respect is earned, not demanded through toxic manipulation. I had severed the rotting roots of my family tree, and in doing so, I had finally allowed myself to blossom into the woman standing on this balcony tonight. I turned around and walked back inside, heading toward the administrative corridor near the museum's private event offices. I found exactly what I was looking for, sitting quietly next to a massive corporate printer, a heavy-duty industrial paper shredder. I did not write a response to Evelyn. I did not text her to explain my refusal. I simply held the filthy yellow notebook paper over the narrow, sharp metal slot. I let it go. The machine roared to life with a satisfying, aggressive whirring sound. Evelyn's tears, her pathetic excuses, and her desperate pleas for $500 were instantly pulverized into thousands of meaningless tiny paper ribbons. The past was officially shredded. I walked away without a single backward glance. When I finally re-entered the grand atrium, the jazz band had transitioned into a very lively, upbeat tempo. The celebration of our $50 million funding round was reaching a joyous crescendo. Julian was standing right near the center of the dance floor, laughing warmly with my lead software engineers. He looked incredibly handsome, a beacon of safety and genuine partnership. When he saw me approaching, his face lit up with that bright, familiar smile that always made my heart flutter. I walked straight into his open arms, sliding my hand perfectly into his. "Everything all right?" Julian asked, leaning down to press a gentle kiss against my temple. "Everything is absolutely perfect," I replied, resting my head against his chest. I looked around the massive room at the wonderful people who actually mattered. I thought about the staggering contrast between my current reality and the miserable fates of the people who tried to destroy me. Darius was currently wearing a standard-issue jumpsuit in a federal penitentiary, serving out his 36-month sentence for corporate espionage. He was no longer the arrogant golden child of Buckhead. He was just another miserable inmate assigned to basic laundry duty, completely stripped of his unearned pride. Brittany, the evil woman who had the sheer audacity to call me ghetto at my own wedding, was completely broke. After her desperate divorce, she moved into a cramped trailer park and quickly remarried a local mechanic, entirely cut off from the luxury lifestyle she felt so inherently entitled to. Richard and Evelyn were currently living in complete, absolutely humiliating obscurity. The proud judgmental patriarch and the status-obsessed church matriarch were now crammed into a tiny roach-infested apartment on the absolute fringes of the city. Their fraudulent financial schemes had left them destitute and permanently disgraced. Every single day they woke up early to the agonizing reality of their own actions. They were completely haunted by the spectacular, undeniable success of the daughter they had so viciously labeled a failure. My company's name was in the financial newspapers. My face was on the covers of business magazines. They could not escape the towering monument of my victory, even as they sat in the dark without electricity. True vengeance is honestly never about stooping down to their pathetic, miserable level. It is not about screaming matches in the middle of a crowded hotel lobby or engaging in petty, endless warfare. True vengeance is about completely removing their access to your light. It is about taking all the raw, agonizing pain they inflicted and using it as premium fuel to build a massive empire they could never dream of touching. They called me the ultimate disappointment, but as I stood there, warmly surrounded by massive wealth, genuine love, and unbreakable peace, I realized the absolute ultimate truth. I had won the war by refusing to play their toxic games any longer. The absolute sweetest, most devastating revenge is simply thriving, spectacularly, every single day, while they are permanently forced to watch you succeed from the absolute bottom of the barrel.